So, question 6 is about Mendeleev and the way he arranged the elements in the periodic table. Another 6 marker. So, as with all 6 markers, the first thing to do is to make sure that you don't start writing until you're pretty sure exactly what you're saying. It's giving you a good clue because it's broken down into the fact that he put the elements into groups and that he left empty places in some parts of his table. Your job is to explain why these are good ideas and why other scientists started to agree with him after a few years. Now, when a question's broken down like this, the key thing is to tackle it in 2 parts. And as you can see from the mark scheme, there are some marks available for looking at the reasons for grouping, and then the empty spaces, and then the reasons for acceptance. So you're basically looking at making a couple of points in each of those 3 areas, and you should be pretty close to your 6 marks. So, area number 1, you put the elements into groups. Here you've got the idea, any idea, that the reason he put the elements into groups is because of the way that those elements have their properties, the way those elements behave. So, elements that behaved in the same way were put into the same group. And that was the key thing, the first thing that he did. The second thing, leaving empty spaces, is a little bit more complicated. Now what he did was he realised that if you put them into groups and you put them in order of their atomic number, every now and then there were gaps in that periodic table where it made no sense for one of the elements that we already knew about to be there. And the big imaginative link that he made was the fact that there may well be elements that we hadn't discovered yet that would fit into the periodic table afterwards. And that's what made Mendeleev's table much better than anybody else's. So as you can see from the mark scheme, empty spaces for undiscovered or elements, the idea that the properties of the missing elements are also predicted, so he was able to say, not only am I saying this element doesn't exist yet or hasn't been discovered yet, but I'm going to predict what it looks like, and ideas that these gaps were left because no known element had these properties. Now any of those things is fine. If you've got a couple of those points, that's good. The last thing, of course, is why did people eventually start to believe him and trust him? Because he was a bit crazy and had a big beard, but what they realised later on is when they start discovering elements that did fit into his periodic table and fitted into those gaps, they really knew that he'd been onto a good thing and that what he had been doing was right. So there you've got the details. You've got the fact that the elements were all in the same group, the fact that he left spaces for undiscovered elements, and that when those elements were found, that's when people started to believe him. And if you look over on the other side, just like before, you'll see that there's 3 levels. So questions 1 to 2, the candidate identifies or discusses a single scientific point about any one of the aspects. So as long as you've mentioned one of those things, and there were 9 of them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1 out of 9 points, 1 or 2 marks. Candidate identifies 2 or points from 2 relevant aspects, so any number of points from the different aspects, and you get 3 or 4 marks. Candidate identifies points from all 3 relevant answers. So if you've got a point in each of these, then you're going to get yourself up to 5 or 6 marks. The big proviso as ever is that if the quality of your written communication stops people from being able to understand what you mean in the science, then that is not going to allow you to get above certain marks. So even if your science is fantastic and at this level 5 or 6 marks, if you can't communicate it effectively, if you can't write it clearly with good spelling and punctuation, then you're not going to get those marks.